Creativity in a nutshell is like using what you have to create something beautiful. You know, I think a lot of artists, and including myself a lot of times, gets caught up on, I would be a filmmaker if I had a red cam. I would be an artist if I had these sort of paints in a studio. Creativity really shines with adversity and restrictions and all these things because you're forced to really think outside the box to get the job done. And we're in a really great time to be an artist and to be a creative and really just to be a learner in a very general sense because a lot of information is just readily available online. I grew up in a generation where whenever I wanted to learn something, I wasn't limited by whatever my parents knew. I wasn't limited by whatever was in the library around me. If ever I want to learn anything, I just go online and look it up. When I wanted to start learning how to make animation, you know, I just went on YouTube and just did tutorials and looked up, you know, the most efficient way to make animations and like how to make a character, how to do 3D modeling, and that's how I learned. With any 3D animation, the computer breaks it down as a series of triangles, and the more triangles you have, the more detail you have. However, the slower your computer runs. I taught myself how to do this on my own, and I was using like a really basic laptop that I just used for school, so I didn't really have a lot of horsepower to play with and experiment with like high polygons. So it was just a part of just my creative process. Yeah, let me show you how I make my characters. I'll make a sketch of a character, then I'll take a picture of that sketch, and I send the picture to my computer, and I 3D model around the sketch. Here's one of the character Darius. I'll get it in here, and then I'll just add the image to an image plane. You can just add it in Blender, very easy. You know, and if you want to do a tutorial, just look up image tracing. Once it's in there, then I'll go and I'll select a plane somewhere. So I'll add a plane, rotate it, move it over, and obviously it has to be in front of the image so I can edit over it. And you know, ideally you want whatever drawing to be really centered and symmetrical and things of that sort, but you know, I just use it more as a reference than a direct image to trace over. So you know, then I cut it in half, whatever thing I'm using, and I mirror it. So whatever I do on one side, I do on another side. So, you know, you can either take vertex points or select the lines or select the face, but for just starting off, I usually just do the points just so I have more control. And, you know, very simple design to this one. I'll just go through it really quickly, get the big details. Now, honestly, this is like the biggest cheat code to 3D modeling is like image tracing. You know, people kind of overcomplicate things, but you can quickly just go in and create a cool character quite quickly with image tracing. So add some materials and lean into the chicken aspect a bit more. So you can kind of see it coming together. You know, go here for the eyes. Just make one eye. And I'm gonna try to make this character Darius look a bit cuter. So I'm gonna just make his eyes really big. Just extrude, give some depth to his eye. Give it some little sheen. Add it so it duplicates. And I'm gonna add his mouth. I'm gonna keep the mouth actually extremely simple, just for the sake of time here. And there's brilliance and simplicity. So when I design characters or when I design anything, I try to use as few details as possible. I like to design right on the edge of perception. If I use any less detail, it may be abstract, but I just use enough where it's like, okay, you can see that that's an eye, that's a face, that's a mouth. You know, your mind fills in a lot of the blanks. This works for me, and I like the aesthetic. So there you go, and that's how I start making them. And I would spend more time, you know, making this guy make more design sense, but this is how I 3D model him. And this is how he looked in the end. There's our little redesign head, but I would do the same thing for the body and the little decal here, which is actually a 3D model. This was before I was using textures. Usually you want to like actually, you know, texture map this, but I just flattened out a 3D model that I made. The next thing you do once you have your model, you want to animate it. Here are the keyframes. This part is where it takes the longest. I'm gonna just go quickly through it. Just get in there and make something happen. You select a bone and then, you know, you move it just like that, just kind of like a toy. Once you get the desired animation, you just add a keyframe. So you can either just add a keyframe to the location of all the bones, the rotation, the scaling, location, rotation, location and scale, rotation, scale, or in this case, I'm gonna just select them all, location, rotation, and scale. The computer will fill in the gaps. So I think I might just add one more, just so you can kind of just see like start to finish. So then the simplest run cycle there ever was. I think I'm able to do this because, well, I'm a really patient person, and you know, you kind of zone out doing these tedious elements, and it's sort of like a meditation, you know, a pretty meditative process that you just zone out doing. At least I do, and that's why I'm able to do it for hours. So obviously I have a vision of how I want it to move in my head, and then I'll do what's called storyboarding, and basically, you know, sort of outline the keyframes of the animation. That'll just be like the big exaggerated movements, and then once I have those keyframes figured out, I'll just go and I'll sort of animate and pose the characters to meet those keyframes. Then, you know, I'll work in between and, you know, make it make sense in the middle. You know, it's just a lot of troubleshooting and seeing what works and tweaking it, playing it, and tweaking it, and then playing it over and over and over and over and over again until it really flows right. Then you can even change the scale of bones, which I like to do, which is, you know, you get pretty interesting effects, make his head huge. Very happy now that his head is big. Here's our two new animations. Boom. And we could just zoom in from the start frame just so we could just go back and forth with it. 9. And so now we kind of have him jumping for joy, this jumping for joy animation. And it's pretty silly and pretty crazy. And if I was, you know, actually animating this for, you know, a project or an idea, I would go back and, you know, maybe tweak it, or maybe add another, you know, frame like the middle way through to just add some more flavor, or just to have specific elements move like this. And you just, you know, you just keep adding stuff. And you know, right now I think adding all this stuff is making it worse, but it can make it better. But still, I feel like it's awfully mechanic, and humans are somewhat gelatinous. And one effect that I like a lot is called the wave. Oh, I already have it applied to this guy. But what is it doing? It must be very minute. But I'm gonna turn up the volume. Is the wave editor. You can kind of see it from this angle a bit better. It kind of just adds a little bit of noise and distortion to it. But you could also change it so it gets really crazy. I've always really been into science and physics, and as a kid, I used to want to be like a scientist, inventor. So I think with 3D animation, it really satiates my desire for science and creativity in a really cool way, because I am able to play with the physics. And honestly, what's even more cool than the physics actually working the way it's supposed to is when the physics ends up not working and glitching out. And that's a space that I really like, and I really like to experiment with, and I'm really interested in. Okay, so now I've added some more physics dynamics, and it's a really quick animation, so you can't really see it go super crazy, but it glitches out, and I kind of like it. So I'm going to show you just kind of an example of something I needed to look up for creating a few of the elements in Daytime Noir. I started making this like 3 years ago, so I was still learning a lot. And back then I needed, some help like making textures. Here's just something I looked up and learned how to do just for this. And I continue to use it in my practice. But as we see on this cup from, Chandler's cup, in past, I would do this the same way I created my faces. I would 3D model like the pupil, 3D model an eye, 3D model the lid, and 3D model his nose. Like his whole face is 3D models, but this is like a texture, so when you go into just a solid mode, it's just a solid cup, whereas his face is like a 3D model. It has depth, and the image on the cup, it doesn't have any depth. So what I did a quick tutorial, and one tutorial taught me so much. And if you look over here on the right, this is the texture I want to apply. And I made this in another scene, and these are actually 3D models. 3D models of rectangular prisms, and then I 3D modeled Stankburger and all this, and then I took a picture of that. But you can use a picture of anything. This was the model that I had just modeled that I was going to put the texture on. I would just go into edit mode, and you project the UVs onto a canvas here. So then you can see here, this is like the 3D model flattened, and this is the image. So, you can stretch it out, move it around, get the image you want, and then even just take particular points on this and stretch them out so it's more balanced. I just learned how to do this on YouTube, and I kind of relatively recently started using textures. And you can keep your models low poly, but give it detail in a really cool way here with this technique. You can see other examples of texturing in Daytime Noir, but it was just, even still in my career, like there's so much to learn, there's so much to know. I'm 10 years in the game now, and I'll still go on YouTube, look up a tutorial created by some 14-year-old across the ocean and who knows where, and learn. And my best piece of advice for anybody who wants to learn how to do animation, or really any sort of new skill, I would say do it with a project in mind. Like, say you want to make a video about walking your dog. Then instead of learning everything about the software at once, which can be overwhelming, just take it piece by piece. Be like, okay, well, this is about a dog, so how, like, type in how to 3D model a dog. Boom. How to 3D model a person. How to make that person walk. How to make a dog walk. And then it's like, okay, well, I want them to be in a neighborhood. How to 3D model a building, and go from it that way. And then once you have these little skills, use what you know how to do and like build the animation. And then it's like, okay, well, I want to add some birds and clouds. How to make clouds, you know? And I think that's the best way to learn. And that's how I learned. You know, I had an idea of little projects I wanted to do, and once I learned one thing, I would just use that over and over again. Then I'm like, okay, I gotta figure out how to do something else, and do it that way. It's a little bit less overwhelming. And then you can see that, like, with these little restraints, there's so much I can do. So then once you do get to that point where, okay, now I can afford to use a high poly count, you know how to do a lot with a little. So then once you have a lot, you can obviously do a lot with a lot. You know, if that makes sense. That's definitely a part of my journey.